Hi, everybody. How are you today? I'm Lizzie Bean with Stitch People. I've also got Spencer here. He's off screen, my husband and business partner. We've been doing Stitch People for, oh, there he is. We've been doing Stitch People for about 10 years now. And I'll just tell you a little bit about us and Stitch People before we jump in for those who don't know us, but I did see some familiar faces in the chat. I noticed Carla jump in here and some Stitch People friends. It's always fun to see familiar faces and names. So I'm Lizzie Bean. We started Stitch People back in, 2011. I think I made my first cross stitch family portrait for Christmas. And at that time, I remember looking on Etsy and there were like 3 listings of anything even remotely similar. And people started kind of saying, oh, I'd love to make one too. And I was like, hey, I'll teach you, I'll show you how. So I wrote a book about it, and we have our do-it-yourself Stitch People book. That's kind of how people know us, is this huge book of all the mix and match patterns to help you create your own custom cross stitch family portrait patterns. And the reason I'm going through the trouble of explaining all this is you'll notice I do a lot by way of customization in the patterns. I want to encourage you to do the same. Swap out colors if you feel like it. Make changes to the stitches if you feel like it. And that's also one of the reasons that we're sort of focusing on a little Halloween portrait today and throughout the next 3 weeks after this, and how we're utilizing cross stitching and embroidery stitches to embellish these portraits. So these are skills that you can use if you wanted to make a portrait of yourself or your family, say for Christmas or a anniversary gift or something like that. You can use these real hair techniques that we'll be learning on the witch, or even just any of the techniques that we're learning today, from basic cross stitch to we're going to be going over straight stitching and satin stitching as well. These are some really easy, simple stitches that you can use that are like super great bang for your buck, easy to do, but look very swanky and will help embellish basically any pattern you do, Stitch People or otherwise. It's a really fun time to get to know us at Stitch People. I just want to mention this time next week, we are having Stitch People Day. So give us a follow on Instagram. We're going to be doing some really, really fun things, lots of giveaways with DMC, who's our partner for this class. And anyway, we love working with them. We're going to have some really fun products and releases and things, and just want to give you a heads up about that. So without further ado, let's get going on our first day of our cross stitch and basic embroidery techniques for our trick or treat pattern. So I have this sample already done. I'm going to stitch with you throughout class on this oatmeal color fabric, just so that we have a couple different examples. If you haven't started yours yet, you can kind of see how it's going to look on different Aida fabrics. That's something that you get to play with. Again, I'm super into customization and I'm super into your personal creativity shining. So that's why I don't specify which color you should use. I also think it'd be really cool on a black Aida fabric. DMC and Michaels have a lot of different Aida fabric options. I also want to talk, for anyone, especially who's new to cross stitching, about the measurements of Aida fabric. This is the type of fabric that you use for cross stitching. You can use cross stitching on a linen, you can use cross stitches on non-Aida fabric, but when you're working on a cross stitch project, especially something like we're doing today, counted cross stitch, where you're counting on a grid, transferring it onto the fabric as opposed to having it pre-stamped on a fabric for you, you're going to have to buy Aida fabric. And each Aida fabric will have a number associated with it. Most commonly, you'll see the number 14, you might see the number 11, 18, or 28. What this number means is the number of stitches or squares, because a stitch will correspond with a square of the fabric, per inch. So I've written down this little cheat sheet here just on my fancy pad, where I generally recommend, I think I recommended it here in the pattern, that you choose a size 11 or size 14 fabric. And there are a couple different considerations as to why you might choose one over the other. Size 11 fabric is a little bit bigger because there's 11 squares or stitches per inch, as opposed to 14, where you're squishing more stitches into the same amount of space. So size 11 is a little bigger. It's a little easier to work with for beginners as a result. One thing you'll want to think about is, as you're working with embroidery floss, I love DMC brand, kind of, I've only ever used them. They have hundreds and hundreds of gorgeous colors of this beautiful floss. It has 6 threads in it. It's a loose twist of 6 threads. And when you do embroidery or cross stitch, you will separate these threads depending on the size of fabric you're using or the stitch that you're doing or what your needs are. So that's something to take into consideration when you're working with the bigger size 11 fabric. I recommend using 4 threads of Aida floss. If you're working with slightly smaller size 11 Aida fabric, I recommend working with 3 strands of floss. You just cut your length and split your threads. Might take a little patience and a little getting used to, but I recommend 3 threads with size 14 Aida fabric. One more piece of logistical information you're going to want to consider is when you're looking at your pattern, whether this one or any other pattern, you'll want to look for the pattern dimensions. That will sometimes be specified, like I've done in this pattern here. You might have to count it, which stinks, but it's called counted cross stitch for a reason. It helps to identify your center point, which again, I've given some little guides. These red hashes, if you follow them to the center, indicate the center point of your pattern. You then want to find the center point of your fabric. So I cut a fabric, I'll fold it in half and half again, and just mark the center point. And I like to make some markings on the back as to where the major elements of my pattern will be. We'll get into that a little more later. But all of this to say, when you identify the total dimensions of your pattern, that's from the farthest edge left and right to the farthest edge top to bottom. In this case, it's the top of the witch's hat to the bottom of the text. We've got a total pattern dimension of 43 squares or stitches wide by 24 squares or stitches high. And this matters because if you have a final framing or display in mind before you begin a cross stitch project, the size of your fabric will affect the finished piece dimensions. Only ever slightly, but it does matter if you have a very specific frame with very specific dimensions. So I did the math for you on this particular pattern. A 43 squares by 24 squares pattern on a size 11 Aida is going to be almost 4 inches wide by 2.2 inches high. And on a size 14 Aida fabric, it's going to be just over 3 inches, so a little bit smaller, by almost 2 inches high, 1.7 inches. So you're going to have a little bit of a smaller finished piece on the smaller size 14 fabric and a little bit of a larger piece on the size 11 fabric. So I know that's a lot of kind of logistical information. If you're not worried about framing, or if you're just going to keep it in the hoop and hang it on your wall, which is a totally great way to go, as you can see, there's a lot of white space here. Whether this was size 14 or size 11 fabric in this hoop wouldn't matter. But when you're preparing how much fabric to cut, what size hoop you want to use, you're going to want to look at your overall pattern dimensions and figure out, sizing accordingly. In this case, we wouldn't probably want to use a 4-inch hoop if we're using size 11 Aida, because the total pattern itself is going to be almost 4 inches exactly. So this does show us that we'd want to choose a hoop that's a minimum 5 or 6 inches big. I believe this one's a 7-incher and this one is a 5-incher. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Spencer if we have any questions.
We're good to go.
Awesome. That's great. Please utilize the chat. Love hearing from you. If you have any questions, please ask them, especially you newbies. Please don't be afraid. There's no such thing as a stupid question. And for those of you who I know are experienced cross stitchers and are here just hanging out and having a good time, please feel free to contribute any thoughts that you have as I'm offering tips. If you have any tips or advice of your own for other students in the class, please put them in the chat, and Spencer will keep an eye on the chat and let us know when something cool and useful and interesting comes along. So again, this is our finished example. This is basically what we're going to be doing over the next 4 weeks. One thing that I wanted to mention, I like to prepare my fabric in advance before I begin stitching, and I like to block out where things are going to go. I made a massive mistake, and here I am, the one like teaching you, and I would just want to give you a heads up as you're doing this, if you like to plan things out in advance, because when you're looking at the front of a pattern and you're looking at what the finished result is going to be, as you can see, these two things match rather nicely. Mummy, witch, vampire, text. Mummy, witch, vampire, text. When you are working on the back side, it is the opposite. Vampire, witch, mummy. You see how it is the opposite? So when I'm making marks on the back of my fabric to then show the front of my fabric correctly, what I did is on the back, I marked out the mummy, the witch, and the vampire. But as you can see, if I were to flip it over, I'd have vampire, witch, mummy, which does not match the pattern. So if you take the time to make some markings, which I love to do to avoid exactly what I just explained, I'd rather make that mistake with some pencil markings than with a long hours of stitching and realize things are in the wrong order. So just a heads up that when you're looking at the pattern or the front of your work, it's going to be a mirror image of when you look at the back. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I just thought that was a funny thing that happened as I was preparing for classes. Oh my goodness. No matter how many portraits, I've probably stitched 500 portraits in my life, and I still do the mirror image thing the wrong way sometimes. That's just how it goes. So today we are going to learn how to cross stitch, and we are going to add straight stitches and satin stitching to our mummy to make him look all wrapped up. I am using a size 14 Aida fabric. This is an oatmeal finish fabric, and I am going to teach you how to start cross stitching. Cross stitch is a very simple stitch. It's technically one of many embroidery stitches, but it basically just looks like a cross. It consists of 2 diagonal stitches that overlap. Something to keep in mind before you jump into it is to make sure, like even if you were to draw a cross stitch or an X, you've got 2 overlapping pieces. As you stitch it, you're going to be stitching those overlapping pieces individually. And I just want to plant the seed now that one of the #1 things you can do to help your cross stitching look, like you've been doing it your whole life, is to make sure that all the under diagonals go the same direction and all of the over diagonals go the same direction. Because as you stitch, they're going to be overlapping naturally. So you just want to make sure that the overlap is consistent. So I just want to plant that seed before we jump in. So as you hear me harp on that over and over and over again, you won't be surprised. So I have taken my medium colored floss. We've got DMC, let's see, DMC 3828 is my medium tan. I've got my dark tan here is DMC 420, and I've got my light tan is DMC 422. And these in combination with each other will sort of create a multi-dimensional, wrapped up gauzy looking mummy. So as I mentioned it for preparation and class expectations, I've cross stitched the head and neck of the mummy before class just to save on time. And I'm going to cross stitch the shoulders and down into the chest part of this part of the pattern to show you how to cross stitch and to teach you some tips and tricks to expedite your cross stitching and to make it look like $1 million or 1 million pieces of trick-or-treating candy in this case. So what I've done is I've cut a length of floss from my bobbin. There are lots of different ways you can store your floss. Michaels.com, go to their cross stitch section. They've got binders, they've got these bobbins, lots of options. It's great for those of you who love, Marie Kondo and organizational shows. This is the medium tan, and this is what I chose to use for the base of my cross stitching. And this, again, I did not specify exactly where to use the light, medium, or dark tans in your mummy. And that's on purpose because I love for people to do what they think would look good. In the example, I used sort of a lighter tan and then did these striations over top it. And I thought, hey, if I'm doing something different for this class, I'm going to do something different. So I'm using the medium tan as my cross-stitched base. And I cut a length of floss. And you may wonder, well, how much floss do I need? Excellent question. What I like to do is find the end, the tip, whatever, of my floss, and I will cut a length that's more or less just to my bicep. Whoop, there's my muscly bicep. Sometimes maybe up to my shoulder, sometimes to my forearm if I know I have fewer stitches. There does come a point of diminishing returns as far as the length of floss is concerned. You might think, oh, I've got a really big cross stitch piece I'm working on. I will just cut a really long length that'll last me a really good long time. I understand. And I too have thought that this would be a good idea. And just please trust me when I say it isn't, because you just open yourself up to bunching, knotting, twisting, all sorts of things that are worse, that are worse than finishing off a color and, starting with a new length, which I'll teach you how to do like a pro. So with cross stitching, I recommend there are numbers of ways to start a cross stitch or a cross stitch project. I really recommend not using knots, because if you can get consistent with your cross stitching, you'll see this one's finished, so there's a little more going on. But if you can get it to lay very flat, I'll see if I can get this on the camera. I mean, it's basically flat right up against my fabric. So if I were to put this in a traditional frame, even this one that has a lot more going on, it doesn't bunch that much up from the back of the fabric. If you use knots to start and stop all your colors, by the end of this pattern, okay, today we're only using 3 colors. Then we have black, orange, purple, more black, green, gray, red. You're going to have so many colors going on that if you have a knot for every single time you start and stop, it's just going to get real messy back there. You might catch yourself with the needle. You might push old chunks of knots through the holes of the Aida fabric. That's another thing you have to consider, because you're working with holes in the Aida fabric. If you use knots, even if they're big knots, that's almost worse, because you need them to be big so they don't pull through the holes of the fabric, but then they're going to be extra chunky. So some people use knots, and that's okay. If that's how you learned, I don't want to make you feel bad or insist that you change. But for those of you who are brand new, I would say get in the habit of not using knots. I'm going to teach you how to cast on. I always think of wax on, wax off with this, but this is the casting on technique. So what I've done already is stitch the head and neck. So where I'm going to cast on is this point in the mummy's shoulder, this top right corner of this particular cross stitch. And I'm going to complete a cross stitch using this square as it corresponds to the grid of my Aida fabric. As I work, you'll notice that I like to keep the focus of my attention on the front of my piece. If I'm flipping back and forth like this, A, you're going to get seasick watching it on your screen at home. And B, I don't want you to feel like I'm slapping you in the face every time I move it. But most importantly, if you can get in the habit of training your hand-eye coordination to work while you're not looking at where to stab, where to pull up, where to stab, where to pull up, you're going to become a lot faster stitcher and a lot more consistent. So again, for those of you who are just starting out, and if I can get any validation on this from anyone in the chat, let me know. But if you're new and you're just starting out, it's going to be a little bit more frustrating, but it's just like riding a bike. You eventually learn that balance, and you will train your eyes to meet your hands and the holes in the Aida fabric where they need to go. Spencer, it sounds like we have a question or comment.
Casting on and off.
Talk
about your hoop.
Oh, yes, I will tell you about my hoop in just a second. So again, I'm going to, I finished the base. I'll just give you a few tricks if it's hard for you to wrap your mind around how to transfer the pattern grid to your fabric grid. Because I've already stitched the head and neck, again, just for purposes of getting ahead in the class, it's easy for me to see where this bottom right point is of the neck, because I've already stitched it. You see, bottom right here. So I'm just going to move over 2 holes to the right. So bottom right point of the neck is right here. And I'm going to move over 2 holes to the right. I'm going to create my first diagonal. And this is one place where you do get to flip your piece over when you're starting, when you're casting on. You want to leave a tail. Again, no knots. I don't have a knot in my threaded needle. I just have a tail, maybe 1 or 2 inches, that I hold, and I hold my needle at the base like this so it doesn't slide through. And when you pull your needle through from back to front, you want to leave a little tail on the back side. And I'm just going to hold that with the index finger of my non-dominant hand. Lefties, do you stitch with your left hands, or do you still stitch with your right hands? I'd be curious to know. And I'm going to create my first diagonal. And you might think, well, which way do the diagonals need to go in cross stitching? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have right over left or left over right on the top or bottom. What matters is what I mentioned before, which is this principle. Regardless of which direction the unders or overs are, just make sure they're all consistent within the same piece, right? So if you can zoom, let's see if we can put, there we go. You can see that all my unders are the top right to bottom left of each square, and all my over diagonals are top left to bottom right of my square. So keeping in accordance with that, I'm going to put my needle back in and create the first diagonal of my cross stitch. Hooray. And I still have my finger on the tail on the back side here. Now I'm going to push my needle from back to front in that same square to complete the cross stitch, but I don't want to pull too fast. What I'm going to do is let myself flip over as I'm casting on. You'll see a loop is being created just by virtue of the stitch. And what I can do as I pull it tight is grab that little tail through the loop, and I've caught itself. And now, I mean, I can pull really hard and that's not going anywhere. So now we have created a secure attachment My therapist would be proud. A secure attachment of our floss to our fabric using no knots whatsoever. And I finished that second diagonal. Again, it matches the same directions as the ones I've already done. And we've just done a cross stitch. For some of you, if you're following along, that might be your very first baby cross stitch of all time. And I congratulate you on your new hobby. You're going to love it. So we can continue this row all the way across the left.
Cut that tail over.
I might, or Spencer asked if I'm going to cut this tail. I might, or I might just continue to catch it in loops across the back. Just depends on the mood I'm in, but either way is good. So now we look at our pattern. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more stitches to the left because I've already done 1 of 6. So I'm just going to orient myself here, figure out where I've gone. And see now, like Spencer said about the tail, I am just going to secure it one more time in one more loop. Pull that tail through. Get it nice and secure. And see, it kind of lays the direction I'm going. So it'll be easy to catch it as I continue.
Is that just for more security?
Yeah, and just to, it's less security at this point and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Cleanliness, organization. Because if you have a tail, that's just willy-nilly out here all the time, if I'm speeding along and stitching, I might jab one of these little threads as I'm making another stitch and like pull it through. And then I've got this random little tail coming out the other side. So if you take the time to secure everything down, then you won't have any little stragglers poking through. So see, I frayed this for the purpose of discussion. Alrighty, so I'm just going to finish this row cross stitch by cross stitch, making sure that all my under diagonals are the same and all my over diagonals are the same. I am a self-taught stitcher, so there are some of you who might look at what I do and be like, Lizzie, what the heck? You could be way more efficient. And maybe I could be. But at the end of the day, cross stitching is something that's just a deliberate, consistent endeavor. And I'll get into some more tips and tricks for success, but the first 2 that I really want you to focus on is, well, 3, I guess we've talked about, is 1, no knots. 2, making sure all your over and under diagonals go the same direction. And 3, keeping the focus on the front. Oops, I've got a knot. Keeping the focus of your eyes on the front and not flip, flop as you go. This happens sometimes. Here's a trick. It feels like the world is over when you get a knot. It happens to the best of us. Like I said, I've been stitching a long time, made a lot of portraits in my life. Unless you've literally threaded your needle through the floss, it's impossible for this to be an actual knot. This is just a loop, a tight loop around itself, which means it's easier to come out. So if you just use your needle as a tool, this is something that I do a lot, and just sort of tug ever so slightly at some of the loops and knots and situations. Aha, there's a little give. You'll be able to work this loop out in no time. I'm going to just take my time here so that you can see what I'm up to. And you just use your needle, poke through, and there we go. We've loosened it up. I can release that little loop and we'll be on our merry way. Deep breaths. Thank that loop for trying to contribute its artistic flair to your project and say, maybe not this time around, little loop. Have a nice day. And then we'll finish out our row here. And I think that does it for this row. Now, Spencer said I should explain what the heck is going on with my hoop. You'll notice that my finished project, let's see if I can zoom out here. The finished project is framed like so, and I need to finish the sides, but if you've ever made or purchased an embroidery situation, it likely looks like this. And that is technically the correct way to do a hoop, that the inside kind of divoted inner part is the back, the raised part is the front. Love that, correct, yes. When I stitch with a hoop, and sometimes I use a PVC frame called a Q snap, but when I stitch with a hoop, I actually like to invert it for my work, and here's why. I tend to be a path of least resistance kind of person. As you can see, I use a mechanical pencil, though both DMC and Michaels have, water soluble pencils. I know heat soluble pens exist, but I have more of these at my beck and call than any sort of special craft pencil. So I use a mechanical pencil because it's easy, it's there, and I draw lightly. I've never had a problem. Similarly, I know that there are people who wash their fabric ahead of time and they iron their fabric ahead of time, and that's all well and good. You totally can do that. I've never done it and I've never had a problem, but here I am working with fabric that's got some, folds in it, and some people might find that inconvenient. You do you. All this to say, Spencer and I have 3 dogs at our house. I like to eat Ruffles chips at my house, and I don't always take the time to like surgically scrub my hands every time I go to stitch a portrait. And just the natural, lotion, body oils, whatever, throughout the day, stuff gets on your fingers that you don't even notice. So when I stitch with an inverted hoop like this, if I have any gunk on my fingers and I'm holding my hoop like this, that is getting on the back of my fabric and is not getting on the front of my fabric. And if anything is on the front of my fabric, it's only on the far edges that are going to be not framed at the end of all this. So this is just my little, being real with you life hack for cross stitching. Highly recommend the inverted hoop. Now we finished our first row of cross stitching, and we did it cross stitch by cross stitch. One way that I think is technically the English method of cross stitching.
Was just about
if I recall
in the chat for somebody.
Yeah, so now what I'm going to do is teach you a way to expedite your stitching. So I'm going to go down to my next row, and my next row, as you can see in the pattern, starts, it's not exactly beneath, it goes out 1 stitch on either edge. So I'm going to go down and over 1, as I've done here, down and over 1, except that's for the stitch as a whole. Because of the directions of my diagonals, I'm actually going down 2 and over 1, and I'll come back up. You'll see what I mean. But generally, if I have a large swath of stitching to do, as with the entire base of this mummy being 1 color, you can stitch in rows, or some people, I guess you could stitch in columns. I've never stitched in columns. Probably just, reading training. I think of things in rows more than columns. But you can stitch all of your under diagonals going 1 direction, and then you can stitch all of your over diagonals going the other way. And this is a great way. I think this is technically called the Danish method of cross stitching, if my internet research has not led me too far astray over the years. But this is a great way to cover a lot of territory. And if you're working on, my sister, she's been working on a massive cross stitch piece, massive. The total finished thing, honestly, is probably 10 by 14, maybe 11 by 17-ish in that arena. It's 1 color, but it's this big, big, big graphic piece and kind of a Celtic-y pattern. Lots going on. And she got in the habit of doing big sections in half diagonals like I'm doing right now, but she wouldn't go back the other direction. She'd just do a whole section in half diagonals because she made a few mistakes. Once had to unstitch or, cut out. You can use a seam ripper or tiny little, embroidery scissors. If you make a huge mistake and you need to get under there and kind of cut things out and pick it out. She didn't want to do that again. So she started doing big swaths in half stitches because those were easier to cut out if they made a mistake. And then once you kind of establish your pattern with these half diagonals, half stitches, I guess it's technically a full diagonal, but half of a cross stitch, then you can kind of ignore your pattern for a while. And if you just want to relax and zone in and just go back and do all the stitches the other direction. So if you're ever working on a big, big piece, that could just be a mechanism of efficiency, if that's something that interests you. So now I'm going to go back the other direction. Oh no, another loop. This always happens in classes. I tell you what. Do you have any questions I can answer while I get this little loopy out of my floss?
No.
Any?
I've been answering a lot.
Look at you.
Things like, do you wash your finished pieces? And...
Oh, you know more about that than I do. Spencer used to, there was a time where the primary thing that I did was make the custom portraits and sell them and send them off. And I would have them all, a big long line of them needing to do them. And I'd finish a portrait every day, every other day for a while. And after I was done stitching it, I got to the point was like, I am done with this portrait, done with this pattern. I never want to look at it again just because I had so many to do. And so I would stitch them and then Spencer would frame them and package them, which was awesome. So he got a little bit more experience washing. If you have any schmutz, as my East Coast fam would say, on your fabric at the end of the day, you can wash it off. I guess you've answered that in the comments, but a little bit of very mild dish soap or laundry detergent on the issue itself. So I remember seeing Spencer would soak it in a little Pyrex dish sometimes. That's also a trick. These style embroidery hoops can leave really, really rigid. I mean, this was in an embroidery hoop for like 10 minutes and it's creased where the hoop was. So if you have really, really bad creases that you can't seem to iron out with all your might, you can soak it in water and that releases the fibers a little bit.
Now, if you're doing that, just try it out on a scrap piece first.
Yeah.
Because especially if you're using a colored Aida, it could potentially, the color
Bleed.
could run.
Exactly. Always test it. And also as far as ironing goes, I definitely recommend ironing around your work and never directly on the work. Because part of embroidery that looks really nice is, you know, the big fluffy stitches and the 3D effect. You don't want to squish that with an iron. So I'm going to teach you one more trick of efficiency. So we've now done individual cross stitches, cross stitch, cross stitch, cross stitch, all the way across. Then we did the under diagonals one direction and the over diagonals one direction. And I'm going to be basically doing that same thing, but sometimes if you're in a groove, you can save a little minuscule piece of time. So if you're doing the under diagonals, I actually, one thing before I get into that, you'll see my floss is all twisted. One thing that you can do to help prevent that is, I don't know how to show you this. There we go. Lift up your cross stitch work. You can see my little face down here at the bottom. Lift it up, let your needle dangle down and just run your fingers down the floss and that'll help untwist it. And now you can see it's just hanging out. It's not all twisty anymore. Okay, back to the point. So I'm going to do this final row like I did the one above it. I'm going to do the diagonals all the way across, do the opposite direction diagonals all the way across. But in this case, instead of coming up and then down and then finding the hole up, that can get a little tedious. And that is ultimately how you cross stitch. But you can kind of double up a little bit. So if you just give yourself some time and patience to figure out your own rhythm with this, before I pull the floss all the way through, if you just keep an eye on where your loops are and you don't catch yourself, I can kind of do a 1-2 pull. Sometimes I get in the habit of doing that. So I go 1 down, make sure this is out of the way. I just want to make sure you can see what I'm doing. 2 up, pull. 1 down, 2 up, pull. Some directions are easier than others, depending on the pattern you're in of stitching, the groove that you've gotten. 1 down, 2 up.
Some good chat about dyeing fabrics in the chats. Crystal said that she did it for the first time a few weeks ago.
Oh, how'd it go?
Fun.
Awesome.
Used a RIT dye and then about 10 minutes in coffee tea to give it more antique.
Cool, love that. One thing I'm going to experiment with, I've seen some people will use watercolors on their fabrics. So you take a nice bright white fabric, you paint a little watercolor backdrop, bada bing, bada boom. It's like a 2 crafts for 1. So
for those who have dyed, Alejandra is asking if the colors do run when you end up washing it. So if you've had experience dyeing your own fabrics, we haven't done it.
I haven't dyed. No, because I find myself pretty satisfied with the selection available, you know, DMC and Charles, I guess DMC acquired Charles Craft, but through DMC and through Michael's, you can buy a ton of different colors. I actually, I mentioned we're doing Stitch People Day in a week. We just take a day to celebrate our community, and we've got some giveaways from DMC, and they sent some rolls of Aida fabric, and they sent light yellow and this beautiful dove gray, which it's just fun. Like that yellow would be a fun, like Eastery pattern. And anyway, my brain got going, but I am curious to try the watercolor thing, because you could do a really fun kind of spooky background for something like this. If we took like a little gray watercolor and gave it a nice little wash, made it look a little foggy. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just chatting and losing track of time, but I do feel like that row took a few seconds less. And when you're working on a big, big project, those few seconds can really add up. So again, we can do a whole row of individual cross stitches. We can do all the under diagonals and all over diagonals, one, in and out at a time. Or if you're feeling a little bit more efficient, you can kind of do a up, down, pull, kind of a rhythm. So that's that. Now we are going to cast off because we have reached the end of the pattern, but not the end of our floss. If we were reaching the end of our floss, this would still do. What I like to do is, you see how our tail has been caught in the stitching of our project. You repeat that on your way out. So I just take my needle, run it under some of the existing stitching, pull it through, and we'll clip it off. And now it's going to be held down. We've got a little bit of a tail poking out here, so I'm just going to trim that back. And as you can see, we are nice and flat. We don't have any knots. This isn't chunky. It is beautiful. So that is our little mummy base. So how are we doing on time? Oh, it's 3:37. We could go all day, but we have plenty of time to do what we need to do. So I've got this little needle minder. This is just, some stitchers really like to use this. It's magnetic, and so it'll hold my needle there. What I'm going to do for the straight stitching and satin stitching for this little mummy guy is I'm going to take one thread, one strand of each of these flosses as outlined here. I've got 422, 3828, and 420 on my pattern. So I'm going to get all these ends loose of my wee bobbins. And I'm going to line up the ends because I want all these lengths to be the same. And I'm going to combine my floss colors. This is not something that I was ever taught. This is something that I just started doing with Stitch People, especially when you're doing hairstyles, or this is a great way to represent kind of graphical prints in, if somebody has like a checkered shirt or something. These are so small, these little portraits, that by combining a few different colors, you can get a real all over kind of look if you're recreating a specific fabric or pattern. So now I've got my 3 colors. They're all the same length. I'm going to split them apart and grab one thread of each of them. One for the light.
By the way, earlier Roxanne said that she could listen to you say the word hoop all day.
Hoop.
Sounds like she's from the South.
Oh.
So she thinks that the way you say hoop is
hoop. How do you say hoop? Hoop. If you were in, well, depending on where you were in the South, you could get a little Holly Hunter and we'd have a hoop. Is that right? Like a hoop. There's I follow this gal on Instagram. She's from Florida, but like deep South Florida. Her accent is unlike any other Southern accent I've ever heard. And I mean, she'd probably say like hoop. hoop.
Here's a good question from Sarah. Can we do 6 threads? Could you use all 6 threads?
Here's the thing.
The time to take it apart.
Try it. That's my challenge to you. Try it with 6 threads. See if you like it. I think it gets a little bit chonky, if I'm being honest with you. What I mean by that, allow me to show you a very rudimentary illustration of what I mean. So I'll do new paper. Okay. So what happens is when you're working with the holes of the Aida fabric, like that. There's another Instagrammer I really like. Okay, this is the hole of your Aida fabric. When we're cross stitching, we're like whoop whoop. We're doing it, tuning it. Love it, love it. Now you'll notice on certain holes in the Aida fabric, like these ones here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 different cross stitches. It's these ones right here, but they're all using that same hole. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 threads, great. If you've got 6 threads each here, this hole is going to be like, because it's got 24 threads in it, right? So the reason this matters, and actually this is a pro tip stitch, so thank you for the segue. Why this matters is let's say you've already done these 2 stitches. Okay. Now you're doing this stitch and you're trying to put your needle in through this hole. You've already got 12 threads to navigate as you're putting your needle down in here. Same thing. You do this one. Cool. You now have 18 threads. And when you're completing this stitch, you've now got, you're trying to get in there. One thing you want to avoid as a new stitcher is catching any existing threads with your needle on the way into a hole that already has stitches going through it. Because what can happen is you won't get, I'll let that focus. See, I've got really consistent looking stitches. I can basically put my needle in any hole here. I'm at a funny angle, so put my needle through any hole here and it will just go straight through because all of the stitches and all of the groupings of floss essentially are all next to each other like this. They're not like, you know, like if you poke your needle through existing floss, then the stitches are all gonna, I love my fingers, love this for us, but the stitches are going to get a little bit like this, as opposed to just sitting nicely tucked in the hole together like that. See what I mean? So all of this is in answer to the original question. The 6 threads will look thicker. I mean, that's this versus that. It will look thicker and it will offer a few challenges as you're actually in the thick of it. See what I did there? It's a thickness pun. There's a lot of words here I got to be careful with when you're talking about who knew crafting could be on such a fine line of innuendo. But anywho, all this to say, as you're stitching, you do just want to be careful with the tip of your needle catching existing threads. If you have more threads, you have more to avoid, and it might be a little more difficult to get as consistent a look. But if you like the thicker, chunky look of the stitching, which is a look, I mean, it's a little bit quirky looking, go for it. Just know what you're getting into, you know what I mean? So now I have threaded up my needle. I've got 1 thread of my light, medium, and dark tan. We've got this nice color combo. That's what's going to give us this multi-dimensional feel to our gauzy mummy. When I'm working with embroidery stitches on Aida fabric or with cross stitch, usually just by nature of cross stitch portraits, I usually have a cross stitch base like the witch's face or the mummy's base, onto which I am doing additional embroidery skills. So generally speaking, when I do embroidery, again, I've got existing cross stitching. And what I like to do, I don't know if this is a thing, but I taught it to myself and it helps me, is I pre-secure the floss. So I could cast on if I wanted to, but when you're doing longer stitches, like we're about to do, straight stitches that aren't as, the ins and outs aren't as compact together. So it's harder to catch the tail. So knowing that, I like to, I've got a little fold back here. Get out of there, you guy. Okay, perfect. So what I like to do is just run my new floss through some of the stitching on the back side and leave a little tail, and I'll just run it through a couple times and secure it. I'm going to do once more for good measure. And now, boop, 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 boop. It's really secure. It's not going anywhere. So now when I want to do some straight stitching or some satin stitching, I can just jump right in and it's not going to get pulled through. The difference between a straight stitch and a satin stitch. So we learned the cross stitch, bam, baby. That's what a cross stitch looks like. A straight stitch, technically, I guess a cross stitch is made up of 2 straight stitches, 2 diagonal straight stitches that cross. So a straight stitch can be as short, as long as anything you like. Those are all examples of straight stitches. Satin stitches. What is a satin stitch? A satin stitch is probably what you associate most with like classic embroidery. If you think of an embroidered pillow that you grew up adoring on your grandma's sofa, it probably utilized satin stitch, which is just straight stitches, really, really, really compact together. And when you do those, for example, in the shape of a leaf or a petal or something, and you do like this, it sort of gives the effect of like a beautifully colored in thing. And that this is likely, like I said, this is kind of what you probably associate with embroidery. This is really easy for machines to replicate. So like embroidered baseball hats or logos often will use this. And it looks, like I said at the beginning of class, a satin stitch is a lot of bang for your buck because it's literally just straight stitches like this. You're just doing them in parallel. And so super easy stitch. looks super fancy. It's beautifully tactile to just like play with. Oh gosh, my ink, lovely, lovely. When it's actual thread and not like disgusting ink, I don't want this to get on my fabric. Oh no, what have I done? But it looks really good and is very simple to execute. So what we can do is, I kind of did on the example, some satin stitched up his arms. So the arms look separate from the rest of the body. So those are going to be really short side by side, but I'll show you what to do. And this is one of the reasons I like to use, and in Stitch People land, I'm always recommending a pointed embroidery needle that has a sharper point. There are such things as, oh, I always get them mixed up. One is called tapestry and one is called crewel. Not
Tapestry's the
pointed.
blunt.
Oh, tapestry is point. Thank you, Spencer.
Crewel
I don't know
is
how
the
you keep it. So I recommend pointed crewel, crewel, embroidery needles for reasons like this, because I like to have the point to be able to sometimes stab outside the holes of the Aida fabric. I know we're literally going outside the box, which is why it appeals to me. Tapestry needles are rounded on the end and blunt, and they can be used with cross stitch when you're really sticking to the pattern and you're only going in and out of the holes of the Aida fabric. But like I said, we go off book here and we have a good time. So to do a little satin stitch, just going to double check. Oh, we're good on time. I'm going to start at the bottom of what is this mummy's little arm. I'm going to bring up my floss and I'm just going to make a straight stitch. Like I said, satin stitches are parallel straight stitches, and we're going to go right across. And I'm first going to utilize the holes of the Aida fabric. There's only 3 parallel stitches needed for the length of his arm on this pattern.
Question while you're doing that.
Okay.
Back stitch versus straight stitch.
Oh, that's a good question. I do want to say I'm running into a situation here where I'm trying to come up through the hole of the fabric, and I was catching, see how I was like catching the threads? I could come up through some of this floss here, and I stopped myself because I don't want it to look chunky. Like I said, I don't want this effect with my floss. I want it to sit side by side. So sometimes what I'll do, if I have a hard time coming up from the back and I can't not catch those threads, I'll stop trying for a minute. I'll bring my needle to the front and sort of brush down the threads and just give myself this Aida fabric hole to work with. And then it'll be a lot easier coming up from the back, whoop, to not catch those threads. Just a little tip. And then I'll speak to Spencer's question. So there is my 3rd parallel stitch. And now I'm going to go outside the holes of the fabric. I'm going to go through the halfway points, just on either side of those existing cross stitches to the halfway point on the other side. And because of the size of this little portrait, I think these 6 stitches lined up, especially because we cross stitched the base underneath. We don't have any of the Aida fabric showing through. That gives us a nice little satin stitched effect. See how it just differentiates his arm ever so. One thing you want to be careful with a satin stitch is to make sure that your threads aren't twisting. Try and just keep an eye on them. I don't know how good a job I'm doing because I'm a little bit like I'm back here, but my work is up here. So it's harder to keep a close eye. But you want to make sure that your threads are laying side by side and not twisting around each other if you want that really flat satiny look that you're probably used to seeing with a satin stitch. So I'm going to repeat this on the other arm just for practice. And then the straight stitches. Oh, look at that. 2 threads came through and 1 did not. I love when that happens. When it does, I just pull everything back out, straighten it out, rethread, and keep going. Now, somebody asked, I presume, the difference between a straight stitch and a back stitch. Straights, and now this is the world according to Lizzie, I believe, based on my experience and my unofficial knowledge of such things, I believe straight stitches can exist more on their own. Like just one stitch from left to right is technically a straight stitch. Back stitching is really more of an outline technique. And we'll talk more about that on the 4th day of class when we're doing the text and the difference between straight stitch and back stitching. But back stitching is really a more of a process stitch where it's like A to B, A, B, C, back to B, D back to C, E back to D, and that helps us create a loop that then becomes a nice line versus, like I said, a straight stitch can exist a little bit more as an island, if you will. So now I'm going to work my way up this other little arm. And some people might say, oh, we're going to the other side of this portrait. Do I need to cast off, rethread, restart? You could, but because it's flat, we're only using 3 strands. I just went right across, and I now have this longer kind of travel stitch on the back to get from one point to the other, but it's ultimately not that long. If I was going from like down here all the way to up here, I'd probably cast off, cut the floss, and rethread. Just because, again, I don't want anything that I could like pull, but since this one's pretty self-contained, I'm not too worried about it. So now I'm going to do those halfway points. And technically, doing the satin stitched arms first. Ooh, my little, do you see this little pokey coming through right here? This is what happens when if you don't get the tail all the way secured on the back. You might get just a little bit of he's kind of poking up right there. I'll deal with him in a second. But I was going to say that we technically tackled the more difficult thing first. These very parallel straight stitches are more difficult than the rest of the straight stitches that we'll be doing. So what I'm going to do for this little tail is just use the tip of my needle and see if I can kind of scrunch him through to the back. And I'm using my nail of one of my fingers on the back side to kind of swipe. There we go. I swiped him away. I gave myself enough slack by poking it through that I could swipe it away. So now you can follow the lines of the pattern here to create the mummy wrap. As you can see, I didn't follow exactly on the head, but just keep in mind anything that you might want to layer. For example, this bandage going bottom left to top right, you might want to do first, and then you could go over top that this way. Just keep layering in mind. But at this point, like I mentioned at the beginning of class, I'm all about your own creativity, your own personal style, what you like to do. I think I'm going to do one more satin stitch across the neck. Like, I don't know what this little mummy did. I don't know if he maybe got decapitated back in ancient mummy land and they had to this is a spooky little portrait, guys. This is Halloween times. So I'm going to make sure that they tied real tight around his throat. I read this interesting article, speaking of spooky, that they found a grave, like a very old grave, like a 16th or 17th century grave in Poland of a woman. And they had buried her with like a farm sickle across her head. They thought she might have been a vampire, because then if she were to come back after death, she wouldn't be able to get up because she would be held down. There's something else about it too that was like, what? Just wow. And they think it's because she had something about her teeth. She had like an those extra canines or whatever. And so I think the people were saying they thought, at this time, I guess there's a lot of superstition. So spooky dooky.
Have you talked about casting off?
Yes. Yeah, we cast it off when we finish the cross stitching. It's essentially just taking your needle when you're done with a section, or if you're getting low on thread, take your needle that is threaded with floss and just run it inside the loops on the back side of your floss and cut it. I'll do that again. I've got 5 minutes left. So I just happened to decide to do more satin stitching across the neck there, but I'm going to take the liberty and I'll just do I'm going to do some straight stitches this way. We're just going to be a little willy-nilly about it. I'm going to go, we just want him to look good and bandaged. So I'm just going to create a little section here. We'll go across his chest from where his arm meets his body to the shoulder. Go back the other way. Just keeping a loose eye on my floss so that it stays flat. I guess technically I'm making these satin stitches as well, but you could just do one-off straight stitches. I'm going to go up. I'm just going to go straight up. Maybe they had a little end tuck there as they were wrapping this mummy up. And the reason I like to cross stitch the base first is so that I don't have to worry about any Aida fabric showing through. I like to have the thickness. I like to have the color. I like to have the consistency of the cross stitched base. And yeah, that's just something I like. So not everyone may want to do it that way. But I find the safety of cross stitching a base. For example, stitch people, a lot of people will do like wedding portraits. And I often like, unless I'm doing an applique where I'm literally affixing a lace or a ribbon to act as the dress or the skirt. Even if I'm satin stitching or doing any kind of embroidery on a wedding dress to make it look like the dress in question of the bride, I do like to cross stitch the base of it and do my embroidery over top it, just again to give me that satisfaction of it being totally done.
You're using one of each color, right?
Yep, one thread of each color. And I'm going to just say in our last couple minutes, so next week is our witch day, and our second class actually falls on Stitch People Day. It's going to be next Thursday, so that'll be a great day to keep in touch with us. But the witch, we are going to be stitching her curly hair is what we're going to be doing, and her little French knot wart. We're going to be adding her little eyebrows. So be sure to download the pattern in advance and read through the class expectation section here on the bottom right for the witch, because just like the mummy, you know, it wasn't as necessary today if you didn't want to cross stitch ahead of time, but it will really help if you're wanting to stitch along with me to do some of the stitching in advance so that you can do some of the details in real time. So I will just mention that we will follow up with you, because I think technically you have to sign up for each class individually. You don't sign up for this series. So we'll follow up via email just to make that easy. You can use the same kind of links, whether you did stitchpeople.com/Michaels or whether you sign up through Michaels.com. Our page leads you to Michaels.com. You'll sign up the exact same way, but I do think you have to register individually for each class. So we will follow up with you, make that easy for you. But, you know, we almost completed this. I'm going to finish this guy off in the next few minutes after class ends today. But we've got ourselves a cross-stitch mummy, a nice dynamic combination of light, medium, and dark tan to create the gauzy effect of weathered old bandaging. I'm going to finish these long straight stitches and satin stitch combinations to make him look all wrapped up. And we'll have the first of 4 elements of our Halloween portrait, which I'm so excited to finish with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your input. Hopefully, for those of you who've never cross-stitched before, you have a little bit better of an understanding of what it looks like and how to do it. I'll give you a better view to look at as I sign off here today. But we will see you next week, same time, same place. Make sure to sign up to stitch this cute little witch with her curly gray hair and her witchy wart on her face. The week after that, we'll tackle the vampire. And the week after that, we will finish this off with some text and talk about straight stitching and back stitching some more, but it's sometimes trickier than it may seem. So do join us for classes 2, 3, and 4, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Have a wonderful day.